Ancient battle tactics so cunning, whole armies vanished. Imagine standing on a battlefield with thousands of soldiers around you, banners snapping in the wind, shields shining, commanders yelling orders, everyone bracing for the great clash. And then the enemy disappears. Not retreats, not surrenders, disappears. One moment they're there, the next they're somewhere you did not expect, doing something you did not prepare for, and the battle you thought you were fighting is already lost. That is one of the strangest things about ancient warfare. We tend to picture it as simple. Two armies line up, they charge, the stronger one wins. Very straightforward, very cinematic, very helpful if you only own 3 background drawings and a handful of spear animations, but real ancient commanders could be terrifyingly clever. They used terrain, deception, timing, noise, silence, dust, weather, false retreats, hidden troops, surprise marches, and one of humanity's oldest military traditions, making the other side feel confident right before everything goes horribly wrong. So today we are looking at ancient battle tactics so cunning, whole armies seem to vanish, or made other armies vanish in all but name. And to do that, we need to talk about a simple truth of war. The side you cannot properly see is often the side that kills you. One of the greatest masters of this was Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who spent the Second Punic War turning Roman confidence into a public safety hazard. The Romans liked directness, they liked mass, they liked discipline, they liked the feeling of putting a very large number of armed citizens in one place and solving problems by walking into them. Hannibal understood that. More importantly, he understood how to use it against them. At the Battle of Lake Trasimene in 217 BCE, he set one of the most devastating ambushes in ancient history. The Roman consul Gaius Flaminius was pursuing him through central Italy, eager for a fight. Hannibal picked the ground carefully, a narrow stretch between the lake and the hills, with limited room to maneuver and poor visibility in the morning mist. Then he hid his forces. This is the part that sounds almost rude in its efficiency. Hannibal placed some troops where the Romans could see them, just enough to pull the enemy forward, while the rest were concealed in the hills and folds of the land. Flaminius marched his army straight into the trap, and then, at the right moment, Carthaginian forces came down from multiple directions at once. The Romans had no proper time to deploy, no organized battle line, no clean front. Some were pushed toward the lake. Others were cut apart where they stood. Confusion spread faster than orders could. In the fog and noise, men often had no idea where the main attack even was. This was not just defeat, it was disintegration. Ancient sources describe tens of thousands of Romans killed or captured. A major army swallowed in a single morning by terrain, concealment, and timing. It was one of those battles where the losing side did not simply get beaten, it got erased as a functioning force before it could fully understand what was happening. And Hannibal was not done. The next year came Cannae in 216 BCE, one of the most studied battles in military history for a reason. This time the trick was not making an army vanish into the landscape, it was making your own center appear weak so the enemy would do exactly what you wanted. The Romans arrived with an enormous army, likely larger than Hannibal's, and they intended to crush him through sheer weight. Hannibal arranged his line with a deliberately bulging center made up of troops who would gradually give ground under pressure. His stronger African infantry were placed on the flanks, held back at an angle. The Romans pushed hard into the middle. At first, this looked like success. Their mass drove the Carthaginian center backward. That was the trap. As the Romans pressed inward, the line they were attacking bent around them. The Carthaginian flanks pivoted inward. Hannibal's cavalry, having beaten the Roman horse, swung back to attack from behind. And suddenly, the Romans were not advancing. They were enclosed. Front, sides, rear, packed so tightly that many could barely use their weapons. Men crushed together, unable to maneuver, unable to escape, while the ring around them tightened. It was less a battle line than a human container being sealed shut. Cannae became a masterpiece of encirclement, not because Hannibal had more men, he did not. Not because he hit harder in a straight fight, but because he shaped Roman aggression into a trap. He let them believe they were winning until that belief became fatal. If Trasimene was an ambush in space, Cannae was an ambush in motion. Now, if Hannibal was the genius of the visible trap, there were other commanders who specialized in something even stranger, making a retreat look real. Ancient armies knew that a fleeing enemy was tempting, probably too tempting. Pursuing a broken force could turn a battle into a massacre, which meant that if you could convince your enemy that you were broken when you were not, their discipline might collapse all by itself. Nomadic and steppe-influenced forces became especially famous for this, but versions of the tactic appeared much earlier and in many places. One of the clearest examples from the ancient world comes from the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE. The Romans, led by Crassus, marched into Mesopotamia expecting a conventional campaign. What they found instead was an enemy built around mobility. The Parthians used heavily armored cavalry and horse archers who could move fast, shoot repeatedly, and stay frustratingly out of reach. This was already a nightmare for Roman infantry, who preferred solid contact and clear engagement. But the Parthians made it worse by constantly shifting distance, withdrawing, returning, circling, firing, and refusing to behave like the kind of enemy Rome liked to defeat. And then there was the famous trick often associated with them, the feigned withdrawal, combined with the backward shot, what later generations called the Parthian Shot. Horse archers could ride away while turning to fire behind them, making retreat and attack happen at the same time. To a frustrated enemy, it could look like weakness. In reality, it pulled pursuers out of formation and kept them under a rain of arrows. At Carrhae, the Romans were harassed, isolated, and worn down under brutal conditions. Their attempts to force decisive action failed. Their cavalry suffered. Their infantry formations turned defensive and static. Crassus lost control of the situation, then lost his son, then lost the army. Again, the point was not just physical destruction, it was tactical disappearance. The enemy you wanted to engage refused to stay where battle rules made sense to you. Every time the Romans tried to pin them down, the Parthians melted away, only to strike again from a new angle. To fight shadows in the open desert is bad enough. To realize the shadows are winning is worse. But cunning did not always mean mobility. Sometimes it meant patience. In 331 BCE, before the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander the Great faced the Persian king Darius III, whose army likely outnumbered his. Darius chose open ground, even leveling parts of it, to give his scythed chariots in larger force room to operate. In theory, this should have favored Persia. Alexander looked at that battlefield and did something incredibly dangerous looking. He moved obliquely to the right. Instead of charging straight ahead like an obliging historical extra, he kept shifting, forcing the Persian line to extend and respond. Darius could not simply ignore this movement because Alexander was threatening space, balance, and control. So the Persians stretched. That stretching created gaps, and Alexander was waiting for exactly that. When an opening appeared, he drove a wedge of elite cavalry toward the Persian center, aiming straight for Darius. This was not a random heroic charge, it was the culmination of calculated movement designed to distort the enemy line first. Elsewhere on the field, things were messy. The Persians still had dangerous forces. The Macedonian left was under heavy pressure, but Alexander had done what he needed. He turned a battlefield chosen by the enemy into one that exposed the enemy's weakness. Darius fled, and once the king ran, the coherence of the Persian army began to break with him. This kind of tactic is easy to miss because it does not look flashy at first. Nobody is hiding in a forest. Nobody is fake running away while shooting over their shoulder like an overachieving nightmare centaur. It is just movement, measured movement. Movement that quietly forces the other side to become less stable until one gap matters more than 10,000 soldiers. And that may be the heart of ancient battlefield cunning. It was not always about a single trick. It was often about controlling perception, making your enemy think the danger is in front when it is on the flank, making them think the center is collapsing when it is bait, making them think retreat means weakness, making them think numbers means safety. Again and again, the best ancient commanders won by attacking not just bodies, but expectations. Because armies are huge, noisy, frightening machines made out of human beings. Human beings get confused. Human beings chase the wrong thing. Human beings trust what worked last time. Human beings panic when the world stops matching the plan. And once panic begins, an army can vanish without literally disappearing at all. Its soldiers are still there, its banners are still there, its weapons are still there. What vanishes is order. What vanishes is communication. What vanishes is the shared belief that this battle can still be won. That is why these tactics mattered so much in the ancient world, where commanders had limited ways to communicate once combat began, where dust and terrain could hide entire movements, and where one bad decision could spread through thousands of men before anyone had time to fix it. A concealed force in the hills, a center that bends instead of breaks, horsemen who retreat without leaving, a a sidestep that stretches an empire's line until it tears. Different tactics, same principle. The most dangerous enemy was often the one who made you misunderstand the battlefield. And maybe that is the real lesson here. Ancient warfare was not crude just because it was old. It could be brutally sophisticated. These commanders did not need radios, satellites, or computer models to outthink their opponents. They needed timing, discipline, nerve, and a deep understanding of how people react when fear arrives wrapped in surprise. So when we imagine ancient battles, we should probably picture less heroic shoving and more psychological sabotage with spears, because some of the greatest victories in history were won before the killing even started. One in the choice of ground, one in the arrangement of troops, one in the enemy commander's assumptions, one in that fatal moment when one army looked across the field and thought it understood what it was seeing, and it did not.